Good afternoon and welcome to a brand spanking news segment, rather obviously titled In Conversation With, a segment specially designed to showcase the backstories of individuals who have made an impact. Now, who can resist an hour of tete-a-tete over a cup of tea on a Saturday afternoon? Well, during this hour, we will delve into a conversation around stories that need to be told of modern day icons. Luminary Learning Solutions have crafted this segment so you, our audience, can be inspired to truly thrive. I'm Anton Thayalan, the Chief Evangelist and co-host this hour. Joining me is our founder and destiny architect, Vidushanatha Vitarana, the host for the afternoon, and my partner in crime. We will take you through an hour of free-flowing discussion. Today's segment on In Conversation With, it is my privilege and honor to introduce Michelle Mills Porter, the People Reader. Michelle is a human communication specialist, a keynote speaker, an author, and creator of the MMP analysis tools. She's Board of Directors Membership Director at the Professional Speaking Association UK. She is the founder of Phone Genius, the art of non-visual communication. Her first company was the youngest to achieve Investors in People and a host of other awards. She was already an expert in communication, but her experience during tsunami changed her trajectory. She had witnessed a magnificence in humanity, the power of true motivation, and the limitless possibilities of collaboration. Well, welcoming her this afternoon. Good afternoon, Michelle. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, Anton. It's my absolute pleasure.
How are you doing?
I'm fantastic, thank you. I'm a little bit cold. As you can see, I've got the fire on. Apart from that, I'm tickety-boo.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Michelle, when we kick off our In Conversation With, a question that I always ask, and this is to kind of set context and to give everyone a glimpse of your normative years. So do share some background, some memories from childhood perhaps, in terms of what was it like growing up, Michelle?
What a question. Wow. I was always very individual. I think it had something to do with the fact that at school I was at the very youngest of the year, and when my friends went to school, I didn't join them. And then when I did join school, they decided that I developed so quickly that they were going to jump me ahead 2 years instead of one. And I think that's quite normal with people that are born on the cusp of when they swap over the school year. But what it meant is that in those formative years, I actually didn't create those really important friendships. So I was always, to a certain extent, I was only allowed to play with the children if I was it in TIG, or the one that I was the wolf in What Time Is It, Mr. Wolf? As long as I was there for a reason, I was never allowed in the in crowd. And so those very important formative years, I always struggled to understand what it took in order to build rapport with other people and what would fit. So I guess that's actually very poignant. Very clever question. I wasn't expecting that, but it's very poignant for the rest of my life, actually.
Well, that's not easy, isn't it? I mean, I remember school days, and I often joke that we look back at our childhood as well as our schooling careers with a great amount of fondness and nostalgia, but we gloss over the fact that they were truly hard times. I remember being punished, and corporal punishment was very much a normal thing when I was growing up, and we got into mischief and got caned, and not that it stopped us from doing anything, but nevertheless, even though we would get together with friends from back then and joke about the fact, wouldn't it be lovely to go back to college? The core honest answer is, I don't think I really want to go back, because, you didn't have any money, you were under the thumb all the time, and you were called names, and it was horrendously difficult navigating through that. Is that what inspired you to get into the kind of work you do now?
It's not really what inspired me, but later on in life, it certainly did take me back to that. But it's a component. It's definitely a component. And you're absolutely right. Children can. It's very awkward, isn't it? Learning all of that stuff. I would never want to go back and have to learn it all from scratch again, because it is hard. The lessons that we go through are incredibly difficult. And throughout my school life, I changed schools. My parents, moved home, and so therefore I was in a different catchment area, and I moved schools. And then I was, I went through that whole process again of starting a school with no friends. So again, that lesson was repeated. And so I guess what I did, and I was in the first year of my high school, which is where you take all your exams, I was really, really doing well. I was a bit of a swot, and I came first in the year in one of the exams, but I realised that I didn't. Well, I realised that I didn't have those friendships, and
I made any friendship to be first in class. I would have, I swear. Anyway, sorry.
Well, do you know what? I sacrificed it. I sacrificed it all in order to have friendships. So I became the class clown, and I became naughty, and I did all those things that got attention and attracted friendship. And my schoolwork went through the floor. So when it came to my exams, I was so ill prepared. I didn't pass any because I was so interested in building relationships and all that kind of thing. So but it did teach me a lot about relationships and rapport,
What inspired you to get to the kind of work you do? Was it by chance or was it by choice?
Oh, it was definitely, well, that's a good question, isn't it? It's both. It was only my involvement in the tsunami and what I saw in the aftermath of the tsunami that completely changed my trajectory. You say that better than I do, Anton. I'm not very good with that word. But I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. And, I'd been on this path of success with my company and everything. And I completely lost interest in it. And I was fixated with everything that I'd learned about humanity. And I had no choice. It was like I'd been put on a different path, and I had to discover what it is that I had found and try and understand that and recreate it. So the real pivotal moment was being in the tsunami, but there are lots of little contributing events in my life that prepared me for that. Does that make sense?
Well, absolutely. And before we get into the tsunami itself, because I think I wanted to get to that from the perspective of life-changing moments, but also how things like that can change you either which way, isn't it? It can either change in the kind of way you've changed, or it can go horribly wrong where you're so moved by that you just can't act, and you can't kind of proceed. But before we come to that, want to ask, when you talked about wanting to make friends and not making friends, and sacrificing your good grades for friends, or to try and win friends, why is it important to have friends? Why is it not okay not to have it and just be fine with it?
Well, I think that all comes down to your behaviour, your personality. It was something that I wanted to get right. I wanted to understand it, and I wanted to have that and to have the ability to be able to do that. But you know, that's another really good question, because quite often if I see a challenge, I want to try and accomplish it. I don't know. I mean, there are people that are very happy. I mean, my own husband is very happy, you know, not having many friends. He doesn't need a lot of friends. Whereas my behaviour, I'm very, very sociable, and I love having those friendships. So for me personally, who I was born and the things in my early life shaped me towards was somebody that desperately wanted those close friendships and contact. So maybe it's part genetics, you know, maybe it's part learned, but there is a desire in me. Doesn't mean that it has to be in anyone else, but definitely desire in me to be able to accomplish that and fix it.
And how did you go about fixing it?
Well, as I said, I became the class clown. I did. I became the class clown. If somebody was being bullied, I made sure that I was the one that protected them and stuck up for them. If somebody had to be the fool, if somebody had to play up to the teacher, it would be me. And I'll never forget, actually, I had a fantastic maths teacher called Mr. Oakes. And I was always playing him up really badly. I played him up all the time, and he always put me in detention. But what he'd do is he'd say, Michelle, you're in detention after school. And I'd wait after school and we'd sit there and he'd watch out the window until everyone had gone. And then he'd say, go on then. And he'd let me go. So I knew he was going through the motions, but he understood what I was doing. And that I've never forgotten that.
That works. That works quite well when you are in school. Did you continue that when you moved into young adulthood as well?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I was in all the clubs after school, and right from school, I went straight into the Air Force. So I joined the Air Force at 17, and I'd lived a very sheltered life. My dad was, you know, very strict, and I'd had a very sheltered life, really. So when I joined the Air Force, whereas everyone else was complaining about rules and how strict it was, I thought, this is freedom. What are you on about? This is fantastic. And I threw myself into everything. So I was in all the sports teams, I was in all the clubs, I would DJ at the discos, I'd be in the amateur dramatics. I filled my life with as much stuff as I could possibly squeeze in, and I had loads of friends as a result of that. So yeah, I definitely carried it on into my adulthood. And even now, you know, I love creating networking groups, and I'm a connector. So yeah, I've always been that way ever since.
What did you do in the Air Force?
Do you know, I wanted to be a cartographer, you know, or something exotic, but I was so desperate to leave her. I know, is a cartographer, is that exotic? Well, it sounded exotic to me. I was so desperate to get away from home and to see the big world and to be out there on my own. I would take anything. And I remember they called me and said, we don't have any availability for cartographers at the moment, but if you want to, you can join as a supplier, which in comparison it's not really a trade, you know, it's just a kind of level entry. And they said, don't worry, once you're in the Air Force, you'll be able to remuster, they call it, which means that you can swap trades. That is incredibly difficult to do. So I found myself in the Air Force doing, you know, counting screws and nuts into little plastic bags by hand and working in the warehouses and doing very lowly jobs, but loving it. I loved life in the Air Force. There was so much extra activity to do. So it didn't matter that that my job wasn't necessarily very skilled. I just filled my life with all sorts of other things that, you know, that excited me.
How long were you in the Air Force for?
They wrote on my papers, they wrote 5 years of adult service. It wasn't quite 5 years, I don't think. I joined at 17 and I was out by 21. And the reason that I left was because I was on what's called notice engagement. And notice engagement means that you can give your notice after a certain amount of time, and then you just have to serve your notice. So it's not a long-term service. And I realised as my personality started to grow, I realised I was probably the last person on this planet that they wanted in the Air Force. I am so naughty. And I'm dreadful with rules. And you know, I remember having arguments with my corporals and my sergeants. I don't think they could wait to get rid of me, quite frankly.
So honorable discharge versus the dishonorable discharge, you decided, let me kind of, part ways in an amicable fashion so that I can go booted out. Wise choice. What happened next?
Do you know what? I went home and I was flicking through the pages of the papers thinking, I don't have a skill. I hadn't had a trade in the Air Force, so I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was flicking through the situations vacant in the paper, and I saw all of these adverts for sales with astronomical amount of salaries in comparison to some of the other jobs. And I thought, so if I can sell, I'm made for life. I don't ever have to worry. You know, I can just, there are loads of jobs out there. So I decided to go into sales, and I found myself a telesales job for a local newspaper. And it was such a dreadful newspaper. Every time I used to ring anyone and say, have you heard of this magazine? They would tell me that that's the magazine they have in the bottom of their litter trays. So nobody read it. But again, I threw myself into it. And for me, it was the connection I had with people over the phone, the ability to be able to build those relationships. And suddenly I was outselling everyone on that magazine. And then something extremely important happened. There was a very important World Cup. 1990, England were in the quarterfinals of the World Cup, and David Platt, my hero, scored an over-the-head goal, and it was magnificent. And then they were kicked out. They didn't go any further, and so we decided as a team that we were going to do this feature in the magazine where all the local shops could pay for a little banner that said, welcome home, boys, we're really proud of you, and put it next to a picture of their favourite footballer. So, we sold that really, really quickly. And I had this magnificent idea of actually getting to meet David Platt. So I thought what I'll do is I will talk to David Platt or his manager or whatever and see if I could get an exclusive interview with him so that I could hand in these magazines and get some photographs. And I thought that'd be great publicity. And by the way, I'd get to see my hero. So we did, and I managed to get, just by phoning people and being cheeky, I managed to get this exclusive interview with David Platt. If you can imagine that this is for the magazine that people use in the bottom of their litter tray, or the bottom of their bird cage, I suddenly realised, actually, I'm quite good at this. Maybe I should think about doing it somewhere else. And that's how my sales career started.
Wow. What? So did you move out of that newspaper and take it somewhere else, or did you actually complete that interview and do that article?
Yeah, I completed the interview and I did the article, but I just thought, if I can do this, then I need to be doing it to somebody that will appreciate me more. And so, and what I then did is I went out and I worked for lots of different companies. So my sales career, and don't forget, I'm 21 now, and coming out of the Air Force, so I had to build up my career really quickly. So I found my sales career taking me in a very colourful way. I had job after job, because the only way that I could raise my salary would be to move to another organisation, because what I found is somebody hires you, they might, if let's imagine they hire you on £5,000 a year. If you do a really good job and ask for 10,000, they're going to say, well, you're doing a good job, but I'm not going to double your wages. So they'll increase your wages by increments, and that wasn't fast enough for me. So I had to move jobs in order for people to say, yeah, I'll pay you 15,000. You know, and that's how I got to a higher level. And then my last employed position in 2000 was as head of client development for a branding agency in London, and I loved that job. I loved it, but I was still using the phone to create those relationships really, really quickly. It was just that this time, rather than ringing people at home and finding out whether they wanted to place an advert, I was ringing the vice president of global marketing at Sony Ericsson and getting appointments with the marketing director at Microsoft. So I was doing exactly the same thing. And you know the key to it? The key is just to be yourself.
That's a pretty dangerous statement, isn't it? And I know exactly where you're going with it. But forgive me for doing this. I keep often telling my guests that that it is part of our job to ask that question. But there is a danger in that, isn't it? I mean, there's a certain expectation of a position. There are certain norms, and the trick, though, is to be so good at what you do, and then be yourself.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. But can I give you an example of what I'm talking about? If I'd have listened to etiquette and the way that you should do things, I would never have done this. So I'm going to tell you now how I managed to get an appointment from a cold call with a marketing director at Microsoft. So I had literally been trying to pin this guy down, and I built great rapport with his PA. And it got to the stage, every time I rang, she was like, oh, he's not here at the moment, Michelle. But, you know, she got to the stage where I said, you know what, if you call back at this time, I will make sure I will get you through. So she made a commitment to me because of the relationship we'd built that she would actually get me through to him. Now, on that said day, when I was due to call him, I remember being so excited. Oh my gosh, I'm going to talk to the marketing director at Microsoft. I can't believe it. And I remember ringing up at the said time, and she said, oh, Michelle, I'm sorry, he's not in at the moment. So I said, OK, I'll call back in 5 minutes. And I called back later, and then she said, oh, Michelle, he's just in a meeting. Give it 5 minutes and call back. So I said, OK, I'll call back. Call back in 5 minutes. She said, oh, Michelle, you know, he's just saying goodbye. Give it another 5 minutes. OK, I'll call back. And all this time I was getting more and more excited and more scared of what would happen when I finally got through. And then when I finally called back and I said, OK, I'm here, is he ready? And she said, Michelle, he's just gone. And I went, no, give me his mobile number. And she just did. She gave me his mobile number. And I put the phone down and I thought, oh my gosh, I've got the mobile number of the marketing director at Microsoft. I can't believe this. And straight away I was on the phone and I rang that number. And as it started to ring, I was thinking, what happens if I get through? What am I going to say? And I started to type the notes into my database, and it popped up and it said 14th of February. And I thought, 14th of February, that's Valentine's Day. Meanwhile, the phone's ringing and it happens to go through to voicemail. And I thought, I've got to leave a voicemail that's going to make him call back. What am I going to do? And then it just came out of nowhere. I started singing Happy Valentine's Day to you, Happy Valentine's Day to you, Happy Valentine's Day. And I left my details, and I put the phone down, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to lose my job. He's going to fire the PA for giving me the mobile number. I'm going to get fired. I'm never going to work again. And then the phone rang, and I thought, oh, and I picked up the phone and I said, hello. And he said, my wife doesn't understand me. And it was the marketing director at Microsoft. And he said, Michelle, you are balmy. He said, I was in the middle of the train and I'm playing this voicemail and everyone can hear you singing Happy Valentine's Day to you. And it turns out that the reason he left the office early is because on Valentine's Day, he always takes his wife to this particular restaurant. And right early on in their relationship, you know, she said, "What can I get you for Valentine's Day?" And he just said, "Oh, don't worry about it." So she'd never bought him anything on Valentine's Day, so it's always him doing all the hard work. So he said it was so lovely to just get that gesture. And what he said to me as a result of me being me and not following the rules and regulations in terms of etiquette and what should be done, but just showing my authentic self, he said to me, "Michelle, you're in. If your agency has got a fraction of your personality, then I want to work with you." And that was it.
That's really quite. I'm still cracking up, so give me a second to kind of get composure back and ask a serious question.
I think I have to say, I have to follow that up and say, I do not advocate that everyone does anything like that.
Of course not. Of course not.
I can do it because I'm naturally cheeky.
Of course, I mean, and I think that's the key. See, I think 9 times out of 10, when people listen to people like you, who are naturally and instinctively who you really are, it's not put on. It's not something that you're trying to be. It's not a marketing gimmick. It's just you. And most people just fail to understand that, and they find that this is a strategy that would work, and try it, and it goes horribly wrong because you can't. And I always give this example of, I mean, I guess in that sense, I can relate exactly to what you're saying, because I guess I'm a lot more tempered now, but ever so often that still jumps out of the box, so to say, and it can go horribly wrong as well. But hey, you know, I mean, you win some, you lose some. But I think the point I want to make is the fact that if you're doing that, you can't do that with the preconceived notion of this is how it's going to turn out. You got to be okay with the outcome. And you must be comfortable being yourself irrespective of the outcome. I think that's the key, isn't it? I mean, otherwise you can't be you. And otherwise you can't have fun. Otherwise you can't do anything, because you're always stuck in that moment where you're worried about what's going to happen if I do that. And life doesn't get played out that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said earlier on about a risk, that was certainly an extremely risky thing for me to do. I'm really lucky that it was okay, that it paid off. But you know, it is a risk. I would have had to, you know, if my company had heard about it and they hadn't liked it, there is a chance I could have lost my job. You know.
Forget you losing your job. The poor PA would have lost her job too. For giving this nutcase the mobile number without verifying. Would have been quite the story. You losing your job is fine. At least you were cheeky and you can laugh about it. The PA is going to think, "What have I done?" You know?
Yeah.
But just to kind of follow through from that aspect of you and your personality and what you do, I think coexists beautifully. And 9 times out of 10, we are very scared to let out who we are, by the fear that we can get judged, that it might not be exactly the right thing to do, or the decorum dictates that we don't. How do you reconcile between the two, and decide, do I do it or do I not? Is that something you're weighing, or is it that something that you turn around and say, hey, you know what? Let me just be myself and let whatever unfolds unfold.
Oh, it's so difficult to answer that. I think, and I'm jumping forward now, but I think what I learned in the aftermath of the tsunami is that we all walk around with a mask on, and I hadn't realised that I'd slipped back into that. I had this to 750,000 turnover by year 3, We were the youngest company in the country to win Investors in People. We were winning all of these other awards. I thought I was rocking it. And it was only in the face of true adversity that I realised that we are all wearing a mask. I was playing a role, and that wasn't really me. So in the face of true adversity, it's almost like if you are caught in a house fire, when you escape that house fire, you will be wearing your pajamas. If you're lucky, you haven't had a chance to put your suit on or your makeup on or whatever else. You just are the authentic you. And it reminded me that actually I'd started to go down a different path. And that was a very tough lesson for me. But now I've got to the stage where I know exactly who I am and what's inside of me. That's what I teach other people, to connect with what's truly inside of them, because that's what fulfills you. Being who you authentically are is so important. We have no idea how important it is. It fulfills us. It gives us energy. It gives us power. And everything starts to happen if we are authentic to our core values, who we are.
Michelle, I mean, from being the sales expert to becoming a communication expert, and before we just quickly dive into your tsunami experience, and we're really, really eager to listen to that. For the benefit of those who've joined in now, we are in conversation with Michelle Mills Porter, the people reader, a human communication specialist, a keynote speaker, an author and creator of the MMP analysis tool. This is an hour designed to bring inspiration through the backstories of modern day icons. So coming back to you, Michelle. So all of this, and you were rocking the world in business, winning all these awards. And I know you had taken a break to travel the world, and I understand you've been in the army. Take us through that story, please.
Anton, I lost you just for a moment there. Can you just repeat the end of that question for me, please?
Sure. Said, with all of the awards that you've won and with all the business accolades, you being the professional communication specialist, you've reached that fame and that stardom, and you decided, if I understand you correctly, to take a break, holidays, and you were part of traveling the world. And that's, if I remember, it was during one of these visits that you encountered, or you ran into the experience of the tsunami. Take us through that experience. I know you did mention that a few times, but we do want to hear the whole story now.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it was a year of so many awards, and I just started thinking that, I needed to spend more time with my partner, Stuart. I needed to take some time out, and so we learnt to dive, and we started to go on a couple of holidays together. And we found ourselves in some really exotic places like the Maldives. And then we took our first ever holiday away at Christmas. We'd never been away at Christmas before, but the dive centre in the UK decided to have this holiday in Sri Lanka. And there was the owner of the dive centre, his wife was British, and he'd been over to the UK. She was a British doctor, and he'd been over to the UK, and he'd come into contact with the dive centre. So they created this fantastic holiday where we would swap, and basically it was our turn to go over to Sri Lanka to his dive centre in Hikkaduwa, and to have a fantastic holiday there. So we literally just got there. We got to the dive centre a couple of days before, and it was just fabulous. We were just getting to know everyone, and we stayed. This is the Poseidon Dive Centre in Hikkaduwa, and we were staying in the Hikkaduwa Beach Hotel, which was right next door. And I'll never forget, actually, on Christmas Day. I know that it's not really celebrated on Christmas Day, it's celebrated on Christmas Eve, but the dive centre put on this fantastic party for us. And, you know, we right into the early hours of the morning, you know, we were drinking arak and, you know, hiding under the table with arak and you know, and going in and out the sea and playing, you know, fighting games with water and all sorts of things. And we stumbled to bed in the early hours of the morning, promising that we would all meet up on the beach at 9 o'clock and go for a dive. So we went to bed and set our alarm clocks. And I remember waking up and going down to breakfast. And it was a glorious day. And we went down to breakfast and a couple of our friends were on the patio having breakfast. And we went to join them. But I'd had far too much arak the night before and decided that I didn't really want to go diving. And I remember a couple of people said, one of the people in our group said, "Did you hear that earthquake in the early hours?" And we were like, "No, I didn't hear anything." And we all made a joke saying that her room was haunted and nothing had happened. And then another thing is the fact that local people were saying that the tide had been out so far, they could now walk to the rocks where they would normally snorkel. So they were all excited going out and exploring because it was such an incredibly low tide. And nobody mentioned that, you know, that could have been a strange anomaly. It was just something that happened. So we went back to bed. Stuart and I went back to our rooms and we decided to sleep off our hangover. And this is the point where I don't know how long it was later, but I remember hearing screaming and shouting and banging doors. And I remember saying to Stuart, "Who have they let into this hotel? I can't believe it. Do they not know there are people here trying to nurse their hangovers?" And I pulled the pillow over my head and tried to go back to sleep. And then later still, we heard this incessant banging. And I remember waking up thinking, that's great. Now the builders have arrived and they're doing building work on the hotel. And I didn't think anything of it, but then we heard what sounded like a storm outside. We could hear swishing of water and it just sounded like a torrential storm. And we thought that doesn't make sense. When we were up having breakfast, it was a glorious day with the blue sky and everything. How could it suddenly be a torrential storm? So Stuart got up and he went to the window and he pulled back the curtain and his voice, something in his voice told me this was horrendously wrong. He said, "I think you better come and look at this." And I jumped out of bed and I ran to the window and literally the water was all around us. There was not a soul in sight. Everyone had gone. And the water, that swishing noise was the water in the palm trees. So we're on the 3rd floor of the hotel and the water's already to the ceiling of the 1st floor. And everywhere we looked, there was just water all the way inland. And it was absolutely terrifying. It felt like the apocalypse. We had no idea what was going on. I grabbed my phone. I remember grabbing my phone and I remember sending a message to my sister and I managed to get it to Stuart's sister and it says, "There's been a bit of a flood, but we're okay," because we had no idea what it was. And as soon as I sent that message, the phone went down and no longer had a signal. And so I grabbed my video camera and I started recording and I thought maybe, because the dive centre's underwater, the roof of the dive centre is being lifted up by the waves and swept inland. And I thought maybe I can shoot some footage which will help Cami to get some insurance money or something. I don't know. And seconds after starting to film, I thought, what are you doing? And I threw the camera down and I thought there's got to be people that we can help. So we literally just threw on some clothing, sensible clothing, whatever we thought we could survive in, and just went looking for people that we could help. I opened up the door onto the hotel room and suddenly the devastation was clear. There was glass and blood and sheets ripped up and all sorts. And I thought, why did nobody tell us? Why was there no alarm? Why did nobody scream and shout? And I suddenly thought they did. I thought it was people mucking around, but that must have been the moment the tsunami hit. And that screaming and shouting, although it was short-lived, that must have been the panic as the tsunami first hit. So there was this feeling of just utter terror, utter chaos, utter confusion, and just not really understanding what on earth had happened. And there we were, stranded in the hotel, wondering how high the water was going to get.
How did that, that's insane, because believe it or not, my daughter would have been about 2 years, I think, at the time, or somewhere thereabouts. And me and my wife took a trip down to Goa because we love antiques. And we had a couple of chairs that we wanted repaired, and we wanted to get some bits and bobs for the house. So I was in a pickup, loaded up my 2 chairs. It was one of my friend's pickups. And we came towards Kalutara. And we generally had breakfast at a place called Monis and New Monis Hotel on that stretch. And for some weird reason, the ATM didn't work. So we went hunting for an ATM, which delayed us by about 10 or 15 minutes, and had breakfast late, therefore. And then when we kind of came towards Kalutara, people started running inwards and kept shouting that the sea was coming in. And me being me, I kind of laughed it off and said, "These guys are nuts, this must be the high tide." And my wife, being the more sensible out of the 2 of us, clearly, turned around and said, "You better go back, we are not going." And I said, "Forget this, I mean, this is just ludicrous, because we've never heard of a tsunami in the first place. And we're surrounded by the sea anyway. And high tide and low tide is normal things, and these must be just idiots who went to the sea for the first time and seeing high tide, considers it to be it coming in." We probably went around 100 meters, 200 meters beyond that. And the panic was just clear, and we just turned back because my wife insisted we turn back and came. And by the time we hit Panadura, the waves had come and gone, and you could just literally see it. And I kid you not, we would have easily had a dozen people on our pickup climbing all over it, wanting to go inland. And we just drove inland because we weren't sure what was happening either. And just like you, we kind of started phoning people up, and the phones were dead. That's when the real panic hit, because that's just not something that would happen. So Hikkaru, just near Hikkaru Beach Hotel, or Coral Gardens as we used to call it, because that's what it was called then, is a couple of my friends who used to play drums, and they had a little shop just next door. So a couple of days afterwards, we loaded up all the provisions and came looking out for them. So I can relate to this completely. And we were out on the day ourselves, and I vividly remember when you said it was a glorious day. That's exactly what it was. It was a brilliant, brilliant day, and we were absolutely excited to kind of get out. And we missed it by probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and that made all the difference. And had we had our normal routine, the Monis Hotel was just completely wiped out. It was completely wiped out. So had we been there under normal circumstances at the time that we generally have breakfast, that would have been us.
Yeah, so, it was incredibly scary, because it's like you didn't get down in Hikkaru, because it's the southeast coast, never reached Redwood, southwest coast. We didn't get a high wave. What it was the water was coming in, but instead of a wave coming in and then drawing out, it just came in again and again and again. So the waves were coming and rolling in really fiercely, but it was one on top of the other. So actually it built to a depth extremely quickly. And the most frightening thing, 2 things in fact. One was the fact that there was this horrible crunching, creaking, dreadful crunching sound underneath the water, as everything underneath was destroyed by the power of this water. And the second thing was the smell, because it's breaking open all the sewage systems. There's diesel in the water. There's everything that was on the ground is now in the water around you, and everything that's inside the water suddenly becomes a weapon. When that's moving, you know, it becomes a weapon, and it was terrifying. It was a good, I don't know how long it was. We managed to half wade and half walk out of the hotel because the water had subsided a little bit, and we got to the other side of the Gaul Road, and we met a couple of our dive friends who had been who had seen people washed away, and they'd managed to get to this higher ground. So, you know, we went to join them, and then the water kept coming in and going out again. Every time it went out, we all piled out onto the streets because there were more and more people dotted around. The longer we waited, more and more people came out. And when the water went out, we'd go out and try and find things that might be helpful for our survival. So, you know, the BCD jackets from the dive centre, breathing equipment, helmets, anything we could find that would help in terms of keeping us safe, we would grab. And then as the water came in again, we'd try and get up as high as we could within the buildings. And it was sometime later that we saw Cami, the dive owner, coming down the Gaul Road with some of the boat boys that worked at the dive centre, and we shouted at him, and he shouted back at us, and he told us, get down here. So we just did. You just did what Cami said. He's a formidable guy, really tall, but only young, but you just did what he said. And he said something in Sinhalese to one of the guys with him, and we found ourselves suddenly being force marched inland by a couple of miles and then up a very steep hill where we reached Jimmy Lal's garden. And when we got to the top, they opened the gates and there was just a garden full of refugees, and that's where we spent the following week, you know, as refugees in his garden.
You did say that that entire experience changed you. So what happened afterwards? What did you do?
Well, I think it changed me because what I saw was, you know, when you see people putting their life on the line for a complete stranger, you realise that behind all the behaviour, there is this benevolence, there's this compassion in humanity, which is beautiful. And once you've seen it in that state, you can never forget it. I think the first thing, it might sound minuscule, but the first thing I did was I had this old Nokia phone that I had that wasn't working anymore. Somebody else had a SIM card, somebody else had a battery, somebody else had a wire. I don't know what happened, but this garden full of people wearing T-shirts and dive gear and swimsuits and stuff that all talked different languages seemed to come together. And we managed to patch together this working phone. And with that one working phone, we managed to make sure that every single person in that garden got one voice message back to their loved ones to say that they were okay. That is a life-saving message to people in other parts of the world wanting to know whether you're alive or not. And that was the first tiny snippet I saw of collaboration. What was happening was people were stripped back to being who they really authentically are. Then they were realizing they had skills to bring to the party that they may have forgotten they had. But all of a sudden you get these skills. I remember when I learned to knit with my nan, now I can knit fishing nets. I remember, you know, fishing with my granddad. I remember being taught how to build a fire. I remember a first aid course when I was in the Girl Guides. All of these skills come out, and then when you put them together and collaborate, you can create something bigger than the sum of its parts, and that's where magnificence can happen.
And how do you kind of move that into, I do know that you raise funds for Sri Lanka. And helped a lot of people through it, and that kind of did that set the tone for what you started doing next in life?
It did. Passion for my business anymore. I didn't want to be at work. I was almost physically sick every time I had to go into work, and I didn't understand why I didn't want to do it. What I did want to do is I wanted to spend all of my time as the PRO in Hikkaduwa Village Fund that we created, and we created that with some of us from the Dive Centre and then lots of people in the village in Hikkaduwa, and it was our mission to raise as much money as we could. And I witnessed that collaboration on a global level, because everyone was doing tiny little things to raise money, but when we put it together, we raised £100,000 in 6 months. It's a phenomenal amount of money, and we sent it back to people in Hikkaduwa, and that feeling. As a rate, we raised £8.6 billion. And when you think about that, that's more than £1 per person on this planet. So that's a powerful thing. And when you think how powerful that is, and how just doing tiny little things, but then bringing it together can create all of these things, I had to do something with the lessons I'd learned. I had to try and understand, why did I fall out of love with my business? Why was I suddenly recalibrated and wanted to change direction in my life? Why did I have this passion for understanding how we communicate with each other effectively, and how can I get this message of collaboration being the answer to the success of humanity? How can I get that out to people? And so I spent years. I closed the business. I was very, very poorly for a while, and it's only now when I look back and I can think, do you know what? I was not in line with my core values. That tsunami had reawoken my core values, and it had taught me that I needed to do something different with my life. So I was only comfortable, and I wasn't comfortable. Can everyone hear?
We lost you just now.
Okay. Are we live again? Can you hear me again?
Yep. Yes.
Fabulous. So yeah, I was saying that the tsunami had actually recalibrated me and woken me up to my true core values. And I started to realise that I could get better and I could be fulfilled if I understood what my core values were and worked towards that. So I then just...
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, then I worked towards learning more about that and learning more about human behaviour. I became a behaviour profiler, then I became a master behaviour profiler, and I learned all I could about everything that I'd learnt. And then eventually, just over a year ago, I created a suite of analysis tools that allow me to be able to, which is a core values analysis, and that helps people to identify what their true subconscious core values are, and therefore what their true motivation is. I've then got a behaviour profile which shows us how we communicate effectively with other behaviour types, and all of that is captured. All of the prominent qualities that we have on a subconscious level, all of that is captured. And then I've got a whole suite of analyses underneath the umbrella of the people reader, and I truly believe that it's not just my passion, it's my responsibility, and it's my destiny to deliver what I'm delivering right now.
I'm conscious of time, and I really don't want to kind of overstep it. But just one last question from me before I kind of hand it over to Anthony. I do want to ask this of you because sometimes it does take a crisis to kind of jolt that in you and reawaken that. But some people never go through that crisis, but have this feeling of inadequacy or void. You're hugely successful, but there's always a void, and I think that's a good time to sit and reflect. What am I missing? Having gone through that experience, what would you advise people if people feel unfulfilled, even having had huge amounts of success? What would you tell them to do?
I would always say, discover your core values. You will not be fulfilled if you are not doing things that actually feed those core values. That's the key for me. There is no other answer. And there are lots of ways to find out what your core values are. You could do an analysis, or you could sit down with your family and you could just write about the things that are important in your life. What are the things that really put fire in your belly? What are the things that you can't wait to do? And then all of the things that you really procrastinate about are an indication of what's working against your core values. So understanding what truly motivates you and doing something in that field will enable that fulfillment, you know. So that's the only answer I have. Whether you've been through adversity or not, is identify with the core of you, underneath all of those masks. Who are you? What do you desire at the very core?
Thank you very much, and I am going to pass it on to Anton at this point, otherwise he's going to.
Now, I've just got one question for you, and thank you for the time and the opportunity. I know you've said that, you know, what you offer as a story is the wrapping, but the real gift is the lessons learned. And through your experience, clearly you've learned collaboration, motivation, resilience, as you rightly brought out. Could you summarize that in terms of how do you drive sky-high performance in organizations using that gift and the lessons learned?
Want to speak, that, you know, you can't become a speaker because you've got a story. You have to understand what the lessons are. What is the point? So what? You know, that's what you need to grasp if you're going to deliver something that's meaningful to other people. In terms of how you actually move that forward, everyone has to find their own path, and their own path is in line with those core values. That's the absolute answer. And the only one that I have to offer is find those core values and live your life to fulfillment. In terms of helping organizations reach sky-high performance, it's very simple. It's about being people passionate. It is no longer enough to be people-centric. You need to be people-passionate. You need to understand every single person in your organisation has to have the opportunity to fulfil their own value. To not only help them understand their values, but also help them to be fulfilled. Once you do that, everything else just happens. Productivity increases, energy increases, results increase, everything increases. And the key is all about those core values and making sure that you're allowing all of your people to achieve those core values in their life. You will get loyal employees that never ever want to leave, and you will have that sky high performance, believe me.
Thank you, Michelle, very much for your time, that wonderful experience. We were in conversation with Michelle Mills Porter, the people reader, a human communication specialist. She is a keynote speaker and author and the creator of the MMP analysis tools. This was an hour designed to bring inspiration through the backstories of modern day icons. Michelle, thank you so much for carving out a moment in your time. I know you've got a busy schedule, and honestly, this conversation has been one thrilling ride and one absolutely inspiring moment. Thank you very, very much for the story, for giving us, allowing us to share with you your experience, which means a lot. To our audience, thank you very much for staying tuned, and I hope you've enjoyed this segment. We do have another interesting personality lined up for the segment next week. Do watch our social media spaces for the links to join in. If you've missed a part of this conversation, it will be up on our YouTube channel. Do visit, do subscribe, do hit that notification button to stay updated, and remember to share. A huge shout out to our technology partners, H1 with Samath and his team. Thank you for being with us and for supporting our season 3. With this, I bid you a wonderful rest of the day. Stay safe, stay productive.